Welcome everybody. If you have come to this link looking for Redistricting Moneyball, then you are in the right place. I'm Sam Wong, professor at Princeton University, and I am your host tonight. And I'm very pleased to host this virtual town hall on the subject of Redistricting Moneyball, a special feature of the Princeton Gerrymandering project for this election season here in 2000. And this is a project that I've been working on in collaboration with Connor Moffat and Jacob Wachspress, who I'll talk about in a moment here. Let me see if I can operate the camera correctly and get that turned on. Okay, and let's see. So I think that I am on now. Let me just jump out of this. Let's see if I can do it. Can I do it? All right. So welcome everybody, and thanks for coming on. Like I said, I'm Sam Wong, and if you've come to Moneyball for redistricting, you're in the right place. If you want to learn more about us, you can go ahead and go to election.princeton.edu. Let me just talk about the project a little bit. We work here at Princeton University. Of course, like everybody right now, we work remotely, and so we're dispersed to various places. And so we have a virtual community here of people who are interested in redistricting, gerrymandering, and fair maps. For those of you who follow us, we do our work at gerrymander.princeton.edu. And at that site, you can learn about my gerrymandering team. We're against gerrymandering, so we're a gerrymandering team the way that cancer researchers are against cancer. So we are that kind of gerrymandering project. Tonight, what I'd like to do is tell you just a little bit about the project, where it's come from, and then turn it over to Connor and Jacob to talk about what they've been doing. Basically, the gerrymandering project has been in existence for a couple of years, and what we do is we combine math, law, and data to try to help bring about fair maps on a bipartisan basis throughout the United States in time for 2021 redistricting. That is our mission. This year, because of the election, we have a special thing that we're trying to do, and I'd like to tell you about that. So let's see. So I'm going to assume that my slides are okay. Gentlemen, if you text me, Jason off camera, Jacob and Connor, text me if I'm doing anything wrong. So what I'd like to do is tell you how we got where we are right now to this point of working on Moneyball. And as I said, this is a gerrymandering project show, and we're actually starting to branch out, and we're getting into other areas of democracy reform. And so it's going to be, we're eventually going to start talking about ourselves as the Electoral Innovation Lab. And I see that I'm not sharing, so let me just work on that. Okay, that good now? Okay, there we go. And so the gerrymandering project has actually expanded a bit, and we're working in other areas of democracy reform, which we can tell you another day. And we're starting to call ourselves the Electoral Innovation Lab. And that's a partnership with Open Primaries. So lots to talk about there another day. Today, I want to just get into a little bit how I got started working on gerrymandering, and it all really started in 2012. Some of you may know, I have a hobby analyzing polls and doing analytics for the presidency, the Senate, and for the US House. And in 2012, I made a prediction error. And that prediction error had to do with the House of Representatives. So I correctly said that the House was in play. I correctly said that Democrats were likely to win more votes at a national level. And then I made an incorrect prediction. And the incorrect prediction I made was that therefore Democrats were likely to take control of the House. And my readers over at election.princeton.edu are really smart. They're like, string theorists, economists, financial traders, social scientists. They said, no, you're crazy. You haven't paid attention to the redistricting that happened in 2010. And they were right, and I was wrong. And this turned into this first article that really launched the gerrymandering project, which is the Great Gerrymander of 2012. And I encourage you to look it up, in which what we described was the kind of partisan acts that had really taken gerrymandering, which has been around for several hundred years. This right-hand caricature is the original Gerrymander that was used as a political cartoon to make fun of the first gerrymander, which was in fact a partisan gerrymander. And then really in the last few decades, gerrymandering has really come to new heights. It used to be that gerrymandering was done to protect individuals. It's since then become more of a team sport. And really in the last 2 decades, gerrymandering has really broken out all around the United States, not just to protect individuals, not just to target minority groups, which is a very important thing that we have to think about when thinking about fair maps, but now it's become a partisan sport where the parties battle one another to try to get single party control over redistricting. And so this article I wrote pointed out that such partisan gerrymandering affected dozens of congressional seats around the United States and may have played a major role in this prediction failure that I made in 2012. So at the time, we were really interested in getting the Supreme Court to intervene. For those of you who've been following this, the Supreme Court was waffling this subject, and really, I would say for more than a decade, for something like 15 years, was possibly interested in regulating gerrymandering. And there were those of us who were really interested in Justice Anthony Kennedy, the swing vote on that case. And so for years, we were really interested in just sort of a magic bullet where we could just have simple statistical standards for defining partisan gerrymandering, and that if the Supreme Court would just simply use those to draw a bright line, we could maybe have a national standard. So we worked on this for a while. There are many people, I think, even on this call who worked on that. And it was, in the end, fruitless. In the end, the Supreme Court stepped up to the brink of maybe regulating gerrymandering. They even recognized the statistical standards. They even cited some amicus briefs that I had co-authored in their decisions. But then they said, okay, partisan gerrymandering is bad. We don't like it. It's an offense against democracy, but it's not a business for the Supreme Court to get engaged in. So this was clearly a bitter disappointment. Racial gerrymandering can still be pursued in federal court, and so that's a small bright spot. But partisan gerrymandering is now something that's basically a great big door for ill doers to go through. And it even may, in fact, endanger fair racial representation, because now racial gerrymanders could conceivably be passed off as being partisan gerrymanders. And so even racial fairness is also at risk. So at the time, I thought, this is terrible. What are we going to do about it? And a member of my staff at the time, even before this decision came out, Brian Remlinger, who was one of the first members of the gerrymandering group staff, said, Sam, it's really time for us to start working on individual states. It's time for us to discover our inner Federalist. And so I wrote this other piece in the New York Times. You can tell that I'm a good academic because I can turn these bad moments into publications. And so I wrote this piece for the New York Times: if the Supreme Court won't prevent gerrymandering, who will? And the idea here is that, that it is possible to pursue gerrymandering and fair maps state by state. So instead of having one big horse-sized duck, now we got to fight 50 little duck-sized horses. And so the project really has turned into finding ways to get fairness in all 50 states. So now this is a map that you can look up at gerrymander.princeton.edu. And this is really the kind of strategy that we are now pursuing at the Gerrymandering Project state by state. And I just want to point out, let's see, I'm going to do a little bit of gross annotation here. There's different ways to approach fairness. So for example, one approach that's starting to work in many states is independent commissions that were pioneered in Arizona, in California, now this year in Michigan, in Colorado. There are these other commissions that have been around for a while, like in Iowa and in other states. And these independent commissions are one way to pursue fair districting. And you can see here that across the United States, we have these maps of all these different colors: independent commissions, advisory commissions. In some states, there is reform on the ballot. So for instance, in Virginia, voters can vote for fair districts in the form of a constitutional amendment, and they have a big chance to move fairness forward. Other states, for instance, here in the South, these yellow states here, these are places where one could imagine pursuing fairness through the courts, again, through racial gerrymandering. As we've gone through this, we are wearing our, white hats, are wearing our, kind of our nerd outfits, saying, could we pursue fairness through these policy changes, through passing laws, public input, sharing data? And that takes care of a lot of states. But there are some states where that's not really the best route. And that's what we're really going to talk about tonight. What we want to talk about tonight is these states that are colored in purple, where there is the possibility of divided government. And this is basically what I would call a brute force, raw political power approach to getting fairness, which is to say the way to get fairness for as many people as possible is to put both political parties at the table and let both of them have at it, and through some kind of compromise, come up with a redistricting map. In Texas, congressional maps are drawn that way. In Florida, redistricting is both for the state legislature and for Congress is done this way. In North Carolina, the General Assembly, but not the governor, draws both the legislative and congressional maps. Minnesota, again, legislature in that case with the governor, and Connecticut. And the reason and finally Kansas, and the reason I'm marking these 6 states is that our mathematical analysis has revealed these as states where it's possible through the ballot box, through you as a citizen, campaigning, getting out the vote, donating to races. Those are places where you can make a difference this year in 2020 in November. So just to get it, let's see if I can close up my annotation, the age of Zoom calls. Okay, so what I'd like to do then is, now that having set the stage, what I want to do is introduce Connor Moffett and Jacob Wachspress. If you guys want to go ahead and turn on your cameras, then what we can do is put you on camera and everybody can get a good look at you. And I want to talk about these guys just a little tiny bit. Let's see, turn on my gallery so I can see you. There they are. Okay, looking great. So this is a project where at the Princeton Election Consortium at election.princeton.edu, I've long been interested in optimizing citizen efforts for the presidency and also for US Senate races. And I've been doing that since 2004. And Connor and Jacob and I got interested in the question of, could we also apply that kind of optimization approach to this question of redistricting fairness, where the presidency's for 4 years, the Senate's for 6 years, but redistricting lasts for 10 years. Now, Connor and Jacob are both recent math graduates. Jacob graduated from here at Princeton, a math major. Connor graduated from math from Caltech. They are also, as it turns out, baseball players. And Connor is on the Caltech baseball team, which really, I think, encapsulates everything right there in that one phrase, Caltech baseball team. And so I think what these guys have done is really turn this concept into something that's practical for everyone. And without getting too much further into their lives, what I'd like to do is turn it over to them to talk about this Moneyball project. And I should also say, if you're interested in asking us questions, there's a Q&A in the Zoom here. And also on Twitter, you can ask questions at us using the hashtag Moneyball2020. Okay, take it away, guys.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Sam. Yeah, so we're all here for the Redistricting Moneyball event. So I'm going to briefly discuss the original Moneyball concept. This concept stems from a baseball strategy executed by the Oakland Athletics starting in the early 2000s. So in most American sports, there's a salary cap, and this cap determines the amount of money that each team can spend on players. And logically, it makes sense that if every team is allowed to spend the same amount on players, teams are placed on a more competitive playing field. However, in baseball, there is no salary cap. So each team just spends as much as their owner approves. And so the A's are a poorer team relative to richer teams like the New York Yankees or the Los Angeles Dodgers. And due to their resource disadvantage, Oakland had to rethink their entire approach to how they acquired players. And so similar to other teams, the A's goal was to maximize the number of wins in a season. However, they weren't afforded the luxury of paying high-profile superstars like rich teams did. So rather, the A's, what they did was they used analytics to better allocate their resources by investing in undervalued players that gave them more bang for their buck. Move on to the next slide. Cool. And so it's kind of a strange start. So at this point, you might be thinking this webinar is a little off topic. Sam was talking about gerrymandering, and then this guy comes on and talks about baseball. So reason that we're talking about baseball is the original Moneyball concept can be easily translated to elections. So for example, each baseball team has a limited budget, just as each citizen has a fixed amount of time and resources they are willing to invest in politics. Baseball teams are trying to win games, whereas in elections, political parties are trying to gain governing power. Baseball has superstars that are overvalued, and politics has races and they have races that are high profile and overvalued. So, for example, it's likely that there are more resources going into the McConnell-McGrath Senate race in Kentucky than the leverage would warrant. If McGrath wins, it's likely that the national wave for Democrats is so large they'll have already flipped the Senate. So the best way for either party to influence whether Mitch McConnell is Senate Majority Leader in 2021 is to invest in seats closer to the majority control tipping point. And yeah, just lastly, baseball has undervalued gyms, which was shown in like the book and movie Moneyball, and politics does too. Like a quick example is just there's Texas state house races that have the potential to influence multiple congressional districts over the next decade. And with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Jacob.
Thanks. So the major political parties are definitely aware of the redistricting implications for this year's state legislative races. They both announced campaigns to target close state legislative chambers in key redistricting states. And it's interesting, both parties state that their priority is to ensure fair redistricting, if you read the statements, but their choices of targets plainly show that their goals are not so noble. For example, Democrats have listed among their states that they're targeting Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor who has some part in the redistricting process. So the only party that could enact a partisan gerrymander in Pennsylvania is Democrats if they flipped both state legislative chambers. Similarly, Republicans have Texas highlighted on this map. Texas has a Republican governor not up for re-election, and really the only party that could gerrymander, do a partisan gerrymander in 2021 is the Republicans. So if partisans are the only people investing in these races, then there's just as much organization on the pro-gerrymandering front as on the anti-gerrymandering front. In order to tip the scales toward fair redistricting, people have to be willing to organize for both parties, depending on the political landscape of a given state.
And we can't let this go by without mentioning, Jacob, the Red Map project, where in 2010, some pretty far-sighted people on the Republican side undertook an effort to get single party control. So this is something that's really emerged in the last one or two redistricting cycles, where especially on the Republican side, there's been an appreciation of the advantages that can come from getting single party control. And so at this point, both parties are mobilized. The Republicans pioneered it, but as you just said, there's now a lot of interest on both sides.
Yeah. So our whole purpose in giving this presentation is to help anti-gerrymandering activists, truly the good guys, identify these opportunities that are very important. Okay, you can switch. Yep. So where are these opportunities? Where are elections going to matter in 2020? Our team at the Princeton Gerrymandering Project has studied the redistricting laws of all 50 states. You saw the map that Sam showed, and this will be a review of that. Many states are not at a significant risk of partisan gerrymandering because they already have a system in place to prevent this, like an independent redistricting commission. Some states are sort of lost causes. They don't have an independent redistricting commission, and they also have almost guaranteed single party control over the redistricting process. I have Arkansas, if they don't get their ballot initiative passed for an independent commission.
Oh, they will.
Okay, we can hope they will.
I hope they will.
And Illinois on the Democratic side. So we're focused on category 3 here. The states we're highlighting have some reasonable chance of bipartisan control over the redistricting process, but not guaranteed. And basically that's ensuring split government between the actors who have some control over the process. Most of the time that means the state legislative chambers and the governor, but there are exceptions. Kansas, for example, has a Democratic governor and Republican supermajorities in both chambers of the legislature. So it's not about who really controls those chambers. It's about the supermajority power to draw maps without the governor. And North Carolina is, the maps are drawn by the state assembly with no governor input. So that's a little bit different too. All right, I will pass it back to Connor to talk about how we thought about these elections.
Yeah, so we're going to start diving into a little bit of math now. To understand which races are the most important to prevent gerrymandering in 2021, we first need to create a model that determines how likely the 2020 election will result in the bipartisan control of redistricting. And to start this process, we need to forecast the margin of victory for each state legislative race in the chambers we're analyzing. So most forecasts on a national level rely on public polling. However, this data just isn't available for state legislative races. The typical polling entities simply just don't collect this data. So to replace this polling information, we rely on the race ratings of the group C Analysis led by Chaz Nuttycombe. And so C Analysis is the only organization that offers comprehensive ratings for individual state legislative races. And as you can tell by the map on the slide, it's a lot of work that they put in to handicap all of these elections. The C Analysis ratings are generated by researching 5 factors, which are statewide election results in each district, incumbent popularity, quality of challenger, campaign finance reports, and demographic trends. And as you can see on the slide as well, their ratings come in several categories, which are toss-up, tilt, lean, likely, safe, and uncontested. And when we researched their previous election results, we found that their ratings result in the following winning margins of 0 for toss-up, 3.9 for tilt, 7.6 for lean, and 12.2 for likely. And so these ratings give us our initial estimate of the outcome of each state legislative race. Move to the, So in addition to the C Analysis ratings, we have created a simple internal foundations model that also estimates the outcome of these races. And our internal model uses 4 components to predict winning margins in each race, which are 1, presidential election results within each state legislative district, 2, the past performance of incumbents, 3, statewide presidential election results in 2016, and 4, statewide presidential election forecasts in 2020. And so by blending our internal model with the C Analysis ratings, we're able to improve the accuracy of our estimates by slightly differentiating districts with the same C Analysis ratings. And so at this point, we have a winning margin predictions for every state legislative race we're analyzing. And I'll pass it over to Jacob to finish describing the model.
And this is, Connor, this is thousands of legislative seats, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. There's no one else that we found that does it, and we have not found anyone else, I think, that wants to do it.
I mean, honestly, I've always been kind of scared of this. I'm sorry to interrupt while you're presenting, but places like the Cook Political Report and the Center for Politics and 538 do district by district ratings of congressional seats. They do Senate, they do governor, and of course the presidency. But this is just an enormous task. So I got to say, Chaz and you guys have done a good job of really finding a way to rank all of these races across the United States. I think that this must be in the hands of the partisan organizations, Democrats and Republicans. But as far as I'm aware, you're right. People have not undertaken such a large project before.
Yeah.
Okay. So where we left off, we had the expected win margins for each district. And now we have to model the uncertainty around those margins to find the chance that both parties will have a say in the redistricting process. We account for 3 different sources of uncertainty in our projected margins. There's uncertainty at the individual district race level. There's statewide shifts toward one party or the other. And there's density-specific shifts where we found that there's significantly more uncertainty in the C Analysis ratings based on whether districts are in rural, suburban, or urban areas. And once we've modeled this uncertainty, we can find the likelihood of every outcome in the 2 chambers in a state. And an example I have here is the heat map for North Carolina, which is particularly interesting because 2 of these 4 boxes allow for bipartisan control over the process and 2 of them don't. If there's D Senate R House in the top left or R Senate D House in the bottom right,
there will be here. These are good.
Right, and you can see they're kind of they're less than half. But the other thing is those orange lines right on the tie, those are probably more likely to be good than bad. If there's a tie, it's going to be pretty hard for a party to gerrymander. So it's not hopeless. It could definitely be split.
Well, our website does list the probabilities of these things happening.
Yeah, we do. Okay, why don't you go to the next slide?
Okay. Oops.
Okay, yeah. Now we understand what's needed and how likely it is to have bipartisan control of redistricting in a state. So we just have to find where voters have the most leverage to push the outcome in this direction. And this diagram sort of explains how we do that. In each district, we have our best estimate of the number of voters who will support each candidate. And then our model turns this into a win probability or a bipartisan control probability. If we add a vote to one side and see how this changes the probability, this gives some measure of the leverage that a single voter has in the district. This example on the slide is simplified to a single district, but we do this calculation to find the impact a single voter has in impacting a state's chances of having bipartisan control of redistricting. So in case it's not clear, this diagram at the left is maybe one example of expected number of voters for each party, and say that corresponds in our model to a 86% chance of Democrats winning. And then we add one Republican voter to our expected margins, and it changes the probability by 2 points. That gives the voter power of 0.02. It's this relative leverage of a single voter in the district. Okay, next slide. I want to maybe summarize the key factors that go into voter power, because what I just described is the most direct mathematical way to explain what we did, but it sort of hides what's really going on. So this is probably the math heaviest slide. So if you don't like math, then you just have to focus for one slide.
We're gonna linger on this a little while. I actually have some things to say about this.
Yeah, we will linger on this one. So roughly, the voter power comes out proportional to P times S over V, where P is the probability that state bipartisan control hinges on this race. S is the number of potentially gerrymandered seats at stake in the state, and V is the expected number of voters in the race. Probably the hardest variable to think about here is P. When I say that state bipartisan control hinges on this race, I pretty much mean two things. One, the district is the closest in its chamber on election day. And two, the winner of this race will determine whether there is bipartisan control. So this is a pretty small number for any given district, but the relative ratings are important.
Right, so that letter P is doing a lot of work. It's like
Yes.
it contains close races in states where the chamber is close. And so P, like there's a whole lot of stuff, that letter P is doing a lot of work.
Right. Like at its core, the number depends on the electoral landscape of the district, and it'll be high if a district is a key battleground district in a state where bipartisan control is close to a toss-up. In states where bipartisan control is very likely or very unlikely, or if the battleground is very vast with lots of possible tipping points, this number will be lower. Next.
So I just on the Q&A, someone says, how do you determine whether or not a seat is potentially gerrymandered? The answer to that is that in any delegation with many seats, so it can be a large congressional delegation or a state legislative chamber, it is inevitable that up to a quarter or a third of the seats numerically can be swung by aggressive districting. And so whenever maps are drawn by legislators or by anybody, like whenever there's a district system, up to a third or a quarter to a third of the seats can be swung not by you as a voter, but by people who wield the pen and draw the maps.
Yeah, I was about to touch on exactly how we calculate this number S. Well, first of all, the reason it's here is because preventing gerrymandering is more important in big states where more seats can be gerrymandered. And from our research, we think that the maximum number of seats a party can gain through partisan gerrymandering is roughly proportional to the number of congressional districts minus one. So we incorporate this factor into our calculation. Obviously, if there's one district you can't gerrymander, you only have one choice for how you're drawing it. It's important to keep this assumption in mind, though, because if you happen to have a personal prediction, for example, maybe you think that parties won't be able to gerrymander egregiously in North Carolina because state courts showed some willingness to overturn them, then you should probably discount the state in our results. But we don't make judgments like this. We think it's outside the scope of our model. And then lastly, V, the expected number of voters in the district, we estimate that using citizen voting age population in the district and statewide turnout estimates from the 2016 presidential election. The more voters in a district, the less power a single voter has to influence the margin. In a state like Minnesota, which is first in voter turnout and has relatively few non-citizens, this dilutes the power of an individual voter. And I should come to this chart on the right here. This is most relevant for this number P. The states that are kind of close to the razor's edge, where bipartisan control is possible but not really guaranteed, those are going to have districts with higher probabilities of being the tipping point. So Oklahoma, I have over here away at the left, it's not going to have bipartisan control, so none of the districts are going to be very high leverage. And you know, Florida has a small chance, but it's possible. And Connecticut, which if you know your states is this little one below Kansas, it's pretty likely that Democrats will not gain a supermajority in both chambers. So they're sort of, it's sort of a symmetry. If you're pretty far from the edge, then you're going to have less likelihood of having a tipping point district. It's not the only thing that matters. It's pretty important among these variables, but the number of voters in the district matters too, and the number of seats at stake.
Yeah, one of the somebody in the audience pointed out that since the units of this voter power are seats divided by voters, and since those two are roughly proportional to one another, what I told that reader over on the sidebar in the Q&A was that therefore, approximately speaking, this calculation was likely to be dominated by the closeness of the chamber and the closeness of districts, mostly independent of the size of the state. And so even though our redistricting calculation is meant to focus on congressional seats, it tends to not scale very strongly with the size of the state. Jacob,
yes,
would you agree with that?
I agree with that. I could add a couple more insights to that. So one thing that matters maybe more than you would expect is, so seats, that number S over V, it's things that affect that are a higher non-citizen population. You will have a higher population in the census and less people that can vote. So that will give a state more power.
Yeah.
And also lower voter turnout will also give a state more power. So one thing I was shocked by, and this is affecting the results. In 2016, Texas had 5 times as many people as Minnesota, more or less, and 3 times as many votes in the presidential election. That is wild to me, but that has an outsized impact on the results because each vote is worth more in a state where a smaller portion of the people are voting.
Right. And I know we're probably going to talk about this later, but just since we're looking at pictures of the states here, there's really this sort of knife edge concept that I've written about at the Princeton Election Consortium for some time, which is that states where the probability of the thing that you care about is between 20 and 80%, right? Those states, those 20 to 80% states are in some sense on a knife edge and susceptible to activism, get out the vote, and donations. And so the 6 states here, so Oklahoma is not one of those states. Pennsylvania looks like it's not one of those states for the time being, although we're obviously keeping an eye on it. But really these 6 states in the center, starting from Florida to Connecticut. So on the left, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Minnesota's right on the edge. And then Kansas, because of some stuff that Jacob talked about before, where there's a supermajority who can override the governor, they're kind of on the edge of bipartisan control, and Connecticut. So really these 6 states, as far as we can tell, are in the 20-80 range. And so therefore they're the ones that are in the sweet spot of being susceptible to voter turnout, registering voters, and turning out the vote.
Yep. You can change slides. I kind of already talked about what's on this next slide, but maybe we can give people a second to look at it.
Yeah, and I'm going to look at the Q&A while you do that.
Okay. Yeah. Just this table, we used projections based on ACS data or maybe it's from actually some government commission that estimated how many US House seats there will be after the census. These might change, but we used these numbers for our calculation of S, subtracted 1. Really, the fraction doesn't exactly matter. We just think it's proportional to S, to the number of seats minus 1. Okay, we're done talking about all the modeling and math, so you can wake up. If you fell asleep, you could wake up. And I'll pass it back to Sam for the interesting results.
Okay, let me just, in the middle of typing an answer, which is a little bit geeky of me to do that while doing this. Let me just do this. Okay, so let me just now turn off the share. Is the share turned off now? Okay, I may have to turn it back on, but let me just, let me come back to this and just say, okay, so let me just show you what it looks like. So we've given you the math. Jacob and Connor have been working really hard on that. And let me talk about exactly what it looks like a little bit, and then we can, and then we can trade off while I maybe read questions to the guys. So let me see here. So let me go here to share screen. If you want to look at the results of all our labors, what you can do is you can actually go to election.princeton.edu. As I said, this is a joint project of the Gerrymandering Project and the Election Consortium. And you can go to election.princeton.edu. It's on screen now, right? And so if you go here to election.princeton.edu, we've got a lot of features here. I just should pause and say that analytics are very much a part of what we have here. We've got snapshots of the races right now. We've even got sidebars to give you a look at national races. We've got places for you to contribute, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, over here on the right sidebar. We're one of the very few sites that has links to both Republican and Democratic fundraising sites. I think that for some of you, that makes us more trustworthy, and for others, it may make us a lot less trustworthy. But anyway, there they are. But here's the site. If you go to Redistricting Moneyball, and we go to this site here, which is election.princeton.edu/data/moneyball. This is really it, and it's going to take a little while to load because I'm doing video and web at the same time. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. So when Jacob and Connor took Chaz's projections, his race rankings, we put them together into this interactive. And this interactive was really created by Mike Halley and by Hope Johnson, and with Mike Halley helping Hope out a bit. And this really shows all the things you would want to see. So you can see here that there's 6 states listed here: Texas, Minnesota, Kansas, Florida, Connecticut, North Carolina. In 4 of these, Democrats have a chance to take bipartisan control. And in 2 of these, Republicans have a chance to get bipartisan control if they don't have it already. And then over here in the left column, you can see all the rankings where this calculation of P times S divided by V that Jacob was talking about, that's listed here. And you can see that right now, the single most valuable legislative seat in the country right now on a per vote basis is the 112th district in the Texas House of Representatives. And so if we go there, do we remember what part of the state that's in? Is it in Houston area?
I don't remember, but I was looking at the participants, and I think maybe the Democratic candidate is here, which would be pretty cool.
Brandy Chambers might be in the House. Outstanding. Well, Brandy Chambers, come on down. We have nothing for you except that you're redistricting voter power. Every voter in your district has redistricting voter power of 100. And so we have scaled everything to you, Brandy. You are the unit of measure. You are the ruler by which other voters are in the United States are measured. So, so voters are quite valuable in Texas, generally because control of the Texas House could go either direction. You can see here in the zoomed in map that those districts tend to cluster in certain areas. There's a few districts down here in the Houston area. There's a few in the Austin area and San Antonio. But right here, I just have to say, I was fascinated when we went through these ratings and discovered this. If you look here, Dallas-Fort Worth is really ground zero when it comes to citizen power. If you look here, Tarrant County, which is the county that surrounds Fort Worth, there's half a dozen districts in Tarrant County that are important for control of the Texas House. And so really, Tarrant County Democrats and Republicans are extremely powerful. And this is going to be a place where getting out the vote is really valuable. Same for Collin County, Denton County, and Dallas County. Basically, the whole Dallas-Fort Worth area is a super important area for districting fairness. And I would say that that if you look up these races, and I'm just going to show off here, here's the race rating. This particular one is a likely Republican race. If the swing goes enough, either because of a strong candidate there or because of a national swing, then the incumbent Lynn Stuckey might be at risk from a challenge by Angela Brewer, the Democratic candidate. So that's just one example of a district. I'm going to zoom back out again. I'm focused on Texas because Texas has some of the most valuable voters in the country. If we scroll down this list, I think I can do it here. Yeah, so you go down. So a lot of these districts are Texas, but if you scroll down the list enough, you start seeing another state, which is, wow, there's a lot of Texas here. What the
I
heck?
think you're on Texas only.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, right. This would be, yeah. Thank you. This is what happens when the boss tries to operate the internet. Okay, so if you go down here to about a dozen seats down, you can start seeing Kansas, which, as I said before, Kansas is kind of a peculiar choice because anybody who knows political geography in the United States knows that Kansas is a strongly Republican state. So why would it be that seats in Kansas are powerful? Well, it's because Republicans currently have a 2/3 supermajority in the legislature, but they only have it by a margin of 1 seat. And if they lose that supermajority, then they can no longer override the governor's vetoes. The governor is Laura Kelly, who's currently quite popular. And so therefore, if they lose their supermajority, they have to deal on a bipartisan basis with the sitting governor. And that's in time for redistricting. If you look at the Kansas map, you can see some key districts here in the Wichita area, right? There's one of the more valuable ones has an incumbent named Ron Howard, which I think is amazing. That's a great name. But then if you go over here to Kansas City is really a hotbed of close races. And it's part of the same story that's happened all over the United States of the suburbs and exurbs of America trending towards Democrats. If you look here in this area in Leavenworth County and really in Johnson County is really a place where, again, voters can be really quite powerful. And so if you look here in this area, you can see 39th district, 17th district, right, and so on. And so these particular candidates are in fact probably going to be, you know, pretty important, and only a few thousand votes get cast in each of these state legislative races. And so these candidates become very important. Their personal stories become important, their strengths as candidates, and of course their ability to ride any kind of wave in national opinion. So those are just examples of things. I've now highlighted two of the hottest states in the country. There are other states that are also quite important. Florida, where again, control over the lower chamber is possibly in play. And there's some other things going on in Florida, like voter registration efforts. There's an ex-felon reenfranchisement law that passed. It's been blocked in some ways by the US Supreme Court. And so those ex-felons, in order to become reenfranchised and re-enter society, have to get their fines and fees paid. But if you were to pay the fines and fees of a voter, say in Miami-Dade County or in the southern tip of the state, those are places where voters would be quite valuable. And so registering voters, campaign money, getting out the vote, there are certain places in Florida where the Moneyball move is to go to those particular districts. And the same in North Carolina, and as I said, also in Minnesota, where it's not the state house, but the state senate. And so you can see here, the state senate, again, there are these key districts. And Jacob and Connor, are there features of this map that we should talk about a little bit while we're here?
One thing that's just kind of neat is if you click on the states in orange at the top, it'll zoom to it and I think make the table on the bottom left only in that state.
Sweet. All right, so there we are. So this is Connecticut, a state where Republicans have a chance to break the Democratic supermajority. Connecticut's a state where it requires a 2/3 vote to pass a district map in the first place. So one thing I think we said briefly is that we looked into the redistricting laws and processes of every single state because my gerrymandering project staff is quite expert in that. And so a lot of this sort of combines math and probability and also the laws of each state. So we have a lot to say about all those things. Yeah, Hope did a good job here. And then here, this is pretty interesting because in our estimation, both the House and the Senate in North Carolina are in play. But because of the size of the districts and because of the exact positioning of either chamber, as far as we can tell, North Carolina state House districts are a better bet in terms of per voter activism than on the House side. And so even though both chambers are have some chance of flipping, the Moneyball move in North Carolina is largely focused on the House side. So I'm taking a really quick look at the Q&A. We're at the 45-minute mark. We've got a few minutes for questions. You guys, if you have anything to say, I'm just going to scroll through the questions.
Yeah, I've been looking at the Q&A and I've answered a couple on text, but there's a few I'd like to talk about. One,
Randy's in North Dallas County. Sorry, I'm just looking at.
One here is, did you consider taking into account which media markets cover the districts based on census geography correspondence, so that districts that make up just a small part of a large market, for example, Philadelphia, end up getting less bang for the buck in terms of whether it's feasible to broadcast TV ads? We didn't do this. In fact, we stopped a lot short of doing this. I want to make clear that we basically are concerned with voter power, where one voter has the most leverage. We are not saying where $1 has the most leverage, and there's a lot of reasons that might be different. If I were making donations personally, I guess I would give to not that well-known challengers that are in key districts. There's some evidence that advertising is mostly to get people to pay attention to you. And so just because it's the highest voter power, it's not saying donate to these seats necessarily.
Yeah, all of our calculations, as Jacob says, are per voter. And so you have to worry about media market costs, as Jacob says. Giving money to challengers is generally a better bet. So one should filter it through that. But I think that simply knowing where the key districts are gives you a 10 to 100-fold advantage over just randomly supporting members of your party. And there's nothing wrong, there's a lot of important policy that is set nationwide. But if your lens through which you view all this is getting redistricting fairness, I think simply knowing where these districts are gives you, I don't know, let's say 100-fold leveraging of your donations. I got a question here from Jason Fireman, Jason's from the Redistrict Network, right? Jason wants to know, are there any remaining 2020 governor's races that are competitive and could be consequential for redistricting? The answer to that, Jason, is no. As far as I'm aware, there are no governor's races that are going to be key for redistricting. However, there are statewide races which are not part of this calculation, and we may as well bring them up right now. There are some statewide races in Ohio that matter. So just to give a little bit of background, Ohio passed fair districting laws where there has to be some kind of bipartisan buy-in for fair maps, and there are now standards written into the Ohio Constitution. That's going to be ruled on by the Ohio Supreme Court, which is currently strongly partisan. And a closely divided Ohio Supreme Court is likely to be more sympathetic to challenges brought under that law. And there are 2 state Supreme Court races on the ballot in Ohio this fall. And because there's only 7 members of the Ohio Supreme Court, having 2 seats in the Supreme Court is a big deal. So that's a case of something that goes a little bit beyond the calculations that we've done for Moneyball 2020, but it's something to think about. If you're looking for a way to convert your campaign energies into fair districting, Ohio is a place where Ohio is looking to be a pretty close state this year for the presidency, and that's going to be reflected down ticket. And there's some, we looked into it, and there's some pretty strong candidates on both sides for the Ohio Supreme Court. So that's a case where Moneyball thinking, even though it isn't part of the math we did, that Moneyball thinking could actually be important for focusing activist energies.
Another one I'd like to answer live is from Josh. Are the seats labeled important only referring to seats that need to be flipped to break the supermajority, or are these all the close races in the states that could flip either way? I'm guessing Josh is from Kansas because of the supermajority comment. So it's a good question, and it's sort of a fine distinction, right? Like, the races that get highlighted are the ones that are closest to the tipping point. And so in Kansas, I'll use an example. It's a little bit more likely than not that the supermajority will be broken. So the seats are probably slightly tilting towards Democrats that are likely to be at the tipping point, maybe toss up or tilt Democrats. In general, since we're targeting these states that are already close, then it is likely that the seats being labeled are like pretty much toss up races, but it is, what we're looking for is the tipping point. It just turns out that if the state's close, the tipping point probably will be the most competitive races.
Sorry, I'm kind of multitasking here, typing answers to people while we're talking. So let's see. So Jane Rolfe wants to know, have you given this information to the state Democratic Committee so they can direct their support to the key districts? Okay, Jane, we're nonpartisan. So what that means is that if they want the information, they are very welcome to it. Brandy, shout out to Brandy. Brandy can have it, but also Republicans can have it as well. And we are making this resource freely available on the internet. This is a research and policy project where we're trying to convert our mathematical analysis into practical knowledge. And this is different. So even being open about it is pretty different from what happened in 2010, when there were some pretty smart operatives, people like Thomas Hoffeller, Chris Jankowski, and others, who launched a project to target state legislatures on the Republican side. And so the way I would characterize it is that Democrats have been pretty slow in the uptake here, where Democrats have typically tried to draw single districts for individuals on their side, but have not been all that interested in creating, more seats for their side. And so Democrats have really been kind of slow to the party, slow to the game. But what I would say here is that what we're doing is we're creating a resource that's openly available, and we fully expect both parties to be interested. And of course, this is an age of citizen fundraising and grassroots fundraising. And if you and anybody who's on this call from either party is free to go over to election.princeton.edu and look over in the right sidebar. And there are ways to target your energies to either party. Anyway, so that's our answer, and we're sticking with it. Let's see. So I'm just looking down here. Does your group offer? Is it okay if I just go with a few more of these guys? Let me see here. So did you take into consideration which candidates have said they support independent redistricting? This is Nicole, who's a candidate Nicole's in House District 59 in North Carolina. We did not. We are strictly looking at gaining bipartisan control. That having been said, my policy side at the Gerrymandering Project is very interested in people who are interested in people who support independent redistricting. I'll give you an example. In Virginia, as the fair districting constitutional amendment was being discussed and debated down there, we were very interested in the handful of Democrats who were willing to give up their own power in the interest of a constitutional amendment. And people like Schuyler Van Valkenburg and other members of the Virginia House of Delegates, they were people who bucked their own party. So I would say for this analysis, no, but broadly speaking, we are very interested in supporting fair districting. And it's unusual for legislators to work against their own party's interest. But we do notice that, at least on the policy side of my team. And let's see, so Mark Johnson says, did you assume that Republicans would all vote together and all Democrats would vote together? In Kansas, there are moderate Republicans who might vote with the Democrats on redistricting.
I can take this one.
Please.
This is a great question because we thought about this. We did, other than if there's a tie. So if there's a tie, we assume that it's pretty unlikely that there's going to be a partisan gerrymander. We did study the tie-breaking mechanisms, but like many times in the House, there's no tie-breaking mechanism. I think that probably we could make a small improvement if we tried to estimate like how hard it would be to pass a partisan gerrymander if it was close. It probably would be pretty hard if you only had one vote extra. But it's not clear to me that this acts like particularly in one direction or the other as far as whether it would increase or decrease voter power if we made this adjustment across all states. So it's something that if we included it, we would have had to make a lot more judgment calls, and it probably would have been a little better, I will concede. But I don't think it's making large impacts on the results.
Yeah, I think that sort of thing is difficult because it really requires a really granular knowledge of the politics of individual states. And we're very interested in that, but also those conditions can change. And it is generally true that candidates, despite the reputation that politicians have, candidates really stick with the things they say while they're running for office for the most part. So we could have done that. I think the one answer there is that as a citizen, what you can do is you can do that and hold your local candidates accountable by telling them things at rallies, at campaign events. One thing that's really struck me starting to get involved in state legislators, business with state legislators, either in Virginia or here in New Jersey, is that these districts are smaller. There are fewer voters. As I said, there's just fewer than 10,000 votes cast in some of these Kansas districts, if I remember correctly. And so it is really the case that state legislators are responsive to citizen concerns. So I would say that if you have concerns about whether your legislator is going to do the right thing when it comes to fair districting, you can actually approach them. It is amazing to me. It blows my mind Texas, for instance, has a part-time legislature, and so they don't even meet the whole year, and frankly, they don't get paid very well. And so state legislators in in Texas, are also a place where they stay close to their constituents. That's also interesting because there's a lot of like inside baseball, no pun intended, but there's a lot of like inside maneuvering for exactly how districting is going to be done in Texas. And so there are questions like there's a delayed census. What's the Texas legislature going to do if they get the numbers too late? Are they going to have a special session? So we're very interested in that, but we largely left it out the way that Jacob has described, which I think is a little bit better analytically speaking, because then you can keep the analysis clean and on the math, and then you can add factors that you know as you deal with individual candidates in individual districts.
Yeah, I think just to like add to that, I think we've tried to be as transparent as possible in how we did this, and it hopefully would only just take a little bit of critical thinking if you have an opinion where you disagree with an assumption we made, to say, how should I sort of adjust this in my mental model? You know, what I might need to lower these numbers a little or raise these.
Yeah, Brandy Chambers, the candidate in Texas, points out that the Texas legislature meets for 140 days every other year, and that the pay is $7,200 per year. And I think we have definitively determined that Brandy Chambers is not in it for the money. $7,200 per year is not really a full income. Wow, citizen legislatures in Kansas and Texas, awesome. Ken Lawler asked, does our group offer assistance to state groups, and he's from Georgia, in analyzing redistricting maps for statistical outliers, as was done in North Carolina for the Rucho case? Yes, we have the capacity to do that. Tonight we're focusing on the 2020 campaign, but I have a terrific team of analysts. They have abilities in doing analysis, in cleaning up precinct data, in drawing alternative maps, in evaluating maps for partisanship. And so we have all that capacity here, and we're anticipating a pretty busy year in 2021. So our shop is open to talk with anybody who wants to work towards redistricting fairness. We specialize in talking with citizen groups who are not part of commercial interests. And so we typically work with citizen groups. We've had great communications with Common Cause. I think Dan Vicuña from Common Cause may be on this call. And so we are very open to discussion, and that's going to be a big project for us next year in 2021. Matthew Oberstate asks, what do you think legislatures like New Jersey and Virginia should do if they need to redistrict in 2021 in time for elections, but census data is delayed? Is it okay, guys? I'm just kind of going to go off the Moneyball thing just for a little bit. Yeah, those are the two states, Matthew, that where there's an issue because there are going to be elections next year here in New Jersey and in Virginia. The one thing I'm going to say about that is that it is surprisingly not that much of a problem to redistrict in time for the elections. And so, for instance, here in New Jersey, there's going to be a ballot initiative that's basically going to force a delayed redistricting, and we're against that. We think that's a bad move. Basically, there's enough time to draw maps in 2021. There are going to be commissions. I'm not sure, but there's likely to be a commission in Virginia, and there is going to be a commission in New Jersey. And those commissions could get their job done in time. The census data is very likely to be delayed at this point. There's so much to say on that topic. But as far as I can tell, there's likely to be enough time. The one thing I'll say about that is that New Jersey has had, and also Virginia, has had a lot of differences, changes in population structure, including ethnic diversity. And so one reason to make sure that redistricting happens in time is for redistricting to reflect that growing diversity in those two states. And so broadly speaking, the position of the Princeton Gerrymandering Project is that redistricting should happen, and it can happen in 2021. Will it happen? Like you, we are part observers and part actors in this battle. Okay, last question. I'm just going to read out the last question, policy question. If Democrats get a federal trifecta and pass H.R. 1, how would that affect the next redistricting cycle? H.R. 1 is a voting rights bill that establishes redistricting commissions across the United States. Well, that would certainly change the game, but I think that such a thing would be likely to meet court challenges. And I think it's an interesting question whether Democrats would stick with the principles that they expressed before the election. If they control the whole process, will they pass that? That HR1 contains a lot of good things in it. It contains redistricting commissions. It contains, I believe it contains a renewal of the Voting Rights Act. And so it's going to be really interesting to watch that. And I would say that anybody who's interested in these issues should be prepared to give a lot of loud and sincere feedback to Congress if Democrats take over in 2021. All right. So let's see. So everyone should feel free to go to election.princeton.edu and get this Moneyball site. The URL for the Moneyball site is a little bit longer, so I won't say it, but it's, yeah, you can get to it by going to election.princeton.edu, which is the Princeton Election Consortium. This is a joint project between the Election Consortium and the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. So let me just say that I really want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And I think we should declare victory in this event. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Connor and Jacob. And we will also thank Hope Johnson, Mike Halley, Injanil Purohit, and Jason Rode. So these are members of the team that helped make this Redistricting Moneyball project flower and take off. And we are deeply appreciative to everyone really at the Election Consortium and the Gerrymandering Project. Have a good night, everyone.